Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that begins with heartbreak but unfolds into one of the most powerful journeys of faith, kindness, and unexpected miracles. It's a story about a man who lost everything in a single moment, only to discover that sometimes God rebuilds your life through the people you least expect. So get ready, stay with me till the end, and let's start. Ethan Walker came home earlier than usual, one quiet autumn evening. The sky fading into a soft orange that should have felt peaceful, but instead carried an uneasy chill as he walked up the steps to the house he had poured his entire soul into. The house he believed was filled with love, warmth, and the promise of forever. Only to freeze in shock when he glanced through the living room window and saw his wife, Madison, kissing another man, with an intimacy that crushed the breath out of him. The sight carved a wound so deep inside him that his knees buckled beneath the weight of his disbelief and heartbreak, and as he dropped to the cold ground outside, he stared at the woman he had trusted more than anything while whispering brokenly toward the darkening sky. "Why, God? Why? I've been honest, loyal, loving. Why me?" But no answer came, only the distant sound of traffic and the echo of his own devastated voice. And in that moment, he realized something inside him had shattered beyond repair. So he stood up with trembling legs and walked away from everything. His home, his marriage, the life he had built with careful hands. Simply left it all behind without packing a bag or taking a final look, wandering aimlessly through the city until the streetlights flickered on and the night swallowed him. By morning he found himself on the unfamiliar side of town, sitting on a curb with the few bills left in his wallet. But days passed and those little savings disappeared fast as he searched for clarity, comfort, or maybe a sign that the pain would dull someday. Yet all he found was hunger, gnawing at his stomach, and exhaustion weighing his body down, until he stumbled into a small, family-run restaurant, hoping to buy the cheapest meal they had only for the owner, a heavy-set man with a cold stare, to glance at his worn clothes and unshaven face before saying with a sneer that stung worse than the cold wind, "We don't serve beggars here," humiliating him in front of the customers. Ethan wanted to argue that he wasn't a beggar, that he had once had a respectable job, a home, a marriage, a life. But the words tangled in his throat, and instead, he simply accepted the small takeaway box the owner shoved at him, stepping outside with the quiet dignity of someone who has lost everything but refuses to lose his humanity. And he found an empty bench nearby where he sat alone, gripping the warm container like it was the last piece of hope he had left. Before taking a single bite, though, he bowed his head and whispered a soft, tired prayer. "Lord, my life is in your hands now." And as he opened the lid, grateful just to smell food again, a faint, trembling voice drifted toward him, and he looked up to see a pregnant woman. Her clothes torn and faded, holding the hands of two small, starving children, whose hollow eyes told stories of suffering he could not begin to imagine. And she murmured in desperation, "Please, sir. We haven't eaten in 3 days." Her voice cracking as though she had asked for help 1,000 times and been turned away just as often. Ethan stared at his only meal, at the steam rising into the cool air, then at the children's sunken faces, their small hands clinging to their mother as though she were the only anchor keeping them from sinking. And despite the gnawing hunger twisting inside him, he gently closed the container, pushed it toward her and said softly, "Here, take it," watching tears spill down her cheeks as she accepted it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny, rusty coin, its edges worn, its surface dull, pressing it into his palm with trembling gratitude as she whispered, "It's all I have left." And although he tried to refuse it, she insisted, her eyes shining with something almost divine. And then she hurried away with her children, leaving Ethan staring at the little coin that seemed worthless, yet somehow carried a strange weight. That night, he curled up beneath an old newspaper near the bus stop, hungry again, but somehow lighter in spirit. Because giving felt better than bitterness, and as dawn crept in with pale blue light, he unfolded the newspaper to cover himself from the morning breeze, and accidentally noticed a small advertisement tucked in the corner that read, "We buy rare coins. Every coin tells a story." Which stirred something inside him, maybe curiosity, maybe the faint spark of hope he thought he'd lost. And with nothing else to lose, he walked to the address listed. The shop's door chimed softly when he entered, and the elderly dealer behind the counter adjusted his glasses as Ethan handed him the rusty coin. But after a long moment of examination, the man's eyes widened, and he declared, stunned, "Sir, this coin is extremely rare. It's worth thousands." Causing Ethan's breath to catch as tears filled his eyes, because the miracle he never expected had arrived through the kindness he offered when he had nothing left to give. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the cramped coin shop, the hum of the old ceiling fan spinning above him as the dealer's words replayed in his mind like a distant echo, rising closer and closer. Worth thousands, a phrase so impossible that his legs nearly gave out beneath him, because only hours earlier he had been sleeping, under a newspaper with an empty stomach and a heart stitched together by sheer faith. Yet now he held a miracle in the form of a rusty coin given to him by a starving mother who somehow still chose gratitude over despair. With trembling hands, he signed the paperwork and accepted the neatly counted money the dealer placed into an envelope, his fingers shaking as though afraid the moment would dissolve if he held on too tightly. And as he stepped outside into the bright morning light, the warmth on his skin felt different, gentler, almost like reassurance. So he wiped his tears, took a steady breath, and immediately rushed back toward the streets where he had met the woman, determined to return the blessing, or at least thank her for the gift that had changed the course of his life. But no matter how many corners he searched, benches he passed, or alleyways he checked, no one had seen her, and the few vendors nearby only shook their heads when he asked. Until finally, a shopkeeper, a thin man with silver hair tied behind him, called out, "Are you looking for the pregnant lady?" And when Ethan nodded with hope flaring in his chest, the man handed him a small white envelope she had left behind, with the instruction, "Give this to the man who gave his meal." And Ethan's heart pounded as he opened it with care, revealing a simple handwritten note whose words struck him deeper than anything he had experienced since his life fell apart. "You gave when you had nothing. This is God's way of giving back. Keep believing. You are never alone." And the moment he read it, something inside him cracked wide open, not the painful kind of breaking he felt when he watched Madison betray him, but a release that washed through him like warm rain after months of drought. And he pressed the note to his chest as tears blurred his vision. Because for the first time since his world collapsed, he felt seen, heard, and held by something greater than his suffering. He walked away slowly, the envelope of money in one hand and the woman's message in the other, feeling the weight of both, but in different ways. One was hope, the other was purpose, and he understood that this miracle wasn't just meant to rescue him from hunger or homelessness, but to remind him that faith wasn't something he had lost, only something he had stopped recognizing in the middle of heartbreak. With renewed strength, he found a small motel room for the night, cleaned himself up, trimmed his beard, washed his clothes in the sink, and looked in the mirror at a man who seemed unfamiliar, yet ready to start again. And as the days passed, he used part of the money to buy decent clothes and search for work, eventually landing a job at a construction company that needed hands-on workers. And though the job was hard and the days were long, Ethan showed up early, stayed late, and worked with quiet determination, slowly climbing from day laborer to team leader in only a few months because people trusted his calm presence and unwavering integrity. With each paycheck, he saved carefully, found a modest apartment, and began rebuilding his life one brick at a time, refusing to let bitterness poison his future the way heartbreak had once threatened to do. And every night he kept the note from the woman tucked in his wallet, reading it whenever doubt crept in, letting the reminder of that miraculous day guide him. Eventually, with a stable life and steady income, Ethan decided to start a small outreach project of his own. Nothing grand, nothing flashy, just buying meals for the homeless on weekends, offering a listening ear, and reminding people who felt invisible that miracles sometimes came wrapped in suffering. And though he searched for the woman many times over the next year, she never appeared again, leaving him to wonder whether she had been someone ordinary or someone placed in his path at a divine moment. But no matter the truth, he carried her memory like a quiet light. One Sunday evening, while handing out meals near a shelter, a young volunteer overheard Ethan sharing his story with a man sitting on the curb and asked softly, "Do you really believe God never abandons people who trust him?" And Ethan smiled with a depth earned from pain, loss, and unexpected redemption, replying, I don't just believe it, I lived it. Because he knew now that faith had never left him, even in the darkest moments of betrayal, hunger, and despair. Years later, when his life was steady and his heart healed enough to allow new beginnings, Ethan finally shared the full story publicly. Not for attention, not for sympathy, but so others who felt broken would know that even when life tears everything apart, even when trust is shattered and hope grows thin, there are moments when grace steps in quietly through rusty coins, unexpected kindness, or strangers who appear at the exact second you need them. And he ended his story with a message that echoed his own transformation. If you believe God never abandons those who trust him. Share this story and keep the faith, because miracles don't always arrive the way you expect. They arrive the moment you're willing to give, even when you have nothing left. As Ethan's life continued to heal and expand, he often found himself walking through the same streets where he had once wandered hungry and broken. Not because he needed to be there, but because those corners, benches, and sidewalks had become reminders of the place where his faith had been tested and renewed. And each time he passed them, he whispered a quiet thank you to God for pulling him out of darkness when he least deserved it and most needed it. Months turned into years, and his small weekend outreach grew into something larger, fueled not by wealth or fame, but by the sincerity of someone who had once depended on the kindness of strangers. A sincerity that attracted people who wanted to help, volunteers who saw in Ethan a humility and warmth that inspired them. And soon a local church offered to partner with him to provide weekly meals, clothing drives, and prayer groups for the homeless, transforming a simple act of gratitude into a growing mission that touched dozens of lives. And yet, even as the mission expanded, Ethan never forgot the woman with the starving children, the woman who had given him the rusty coin that had rewritten the entire course of his life. And though he searched hospitals, shelters, outreach centers, and even old records, she remained a mystery, almost as if she had disappeared the moment her purpose in his journey was fulfilled, leaving behind nothing but the note he kept close to his heart, a note that had faded at the edges from years of handling, but still carried the same powerful message that had reshaped his soul. You are never alone. A message that felt truer with every passing year. Eventually, with the help of others, Ethan opened a small community center in an empty building donated by a local businessman who admired his resilience. And the center became a sanctuary for the weary, offering free meals, basic classes, counseling, and a place to rest. For those who had nowhere else to go, and whenever someone asked him why he worked so tirelessly to help strangers, he would simply smile and say, "Because once someone helped me when I thought my life was over." Though he rarely shared the full story unless a person needed it, because he understood that hope grows best when planted gently. By the time he was in his early 40s, the center had become a pillar in the neighborhood, a place where people found not just food, but dignity, comfort, and community. And though Ethan was proud of the work, he always insisted that the credit belonged to God alone. Because without divine timing, a rusty coin, and a hungry mother's gratitude, and none of it would exist. One snowy December evening, after closing up the center for the night, Ethan walked home through softly falling flakes, feeling the familiar peace that winter brought him. And as he reached his apartment building, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with heavy grocery bags, so he hurried over to help her, lifting the bags with ease and carrying them inside her building across the street. And when she thanked him with a warm smile, something about her gentle voice tugged at his memory. But he brushed it off politely, assuming it was nothing more than the comfort of kindness shared between strangers. Still, that night as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling, so he prayed for clarity, as he often did when something stirred deeply without explanation, and drifted into sleep with a sense that change was coming again. Though he didn't yet understand in what form, days later, while hosting a Christmas gathering at the community center, an event filled with laughter, music, warm meals, and children's giggles, Ethan stood near the entrance handing out plates when a young woman approached him, her eyes soft and full of quiet recognition, and she said, "My mother used to talk about a man who gave her his only meal years ago when she was pregnant and desperate. She said he saved her and my siblings." And Ethan felt his heart stutter as she continued, reaching into her coat pocket and pulling out an object wrapped in cloth. "She always wanted you to have this when we found you." and when she placed it in his hand, and he slowly unwrapped it, he gasped as he stared down at the rusty coin, the same coin he had sold long ago to escape desperation. Yet this one was a perfect replica, shining faintly under the Christmas lights as though touched by something beyond ordinary explanation. The young woman smiled sadly and explained that her mother had passed away the previous year, but before she died, she told her children about the man on the bench who gave without hesitation, who offered kindness when he had nothing, and she made them promise to find him someday and return the symbolic coin that represented the miracle that changed both their lives. Ethan stood there speechless, his emotions crashing over him like waves. Grief for the woman he never got to thank. Gratitude for the chain of events her presence had sparked. Awe at the divine symmetry of life and a profound sense of closure that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. And as the sounds of celebration carried through the center behind him, he closed his fingers gently around the coin, whispering a prayer of thanks before looking up at the young woman with tears in his eyes and saying, "Your mother saved me just as much as I saved her." And the two of them embraced in the glow of twinkling lights, surrounded by the warmth of community and the quiet magic of a story that had come full circle. In the years that followed, Ethan kept the new coin on his desk at the center as a reminder that miracles sometimes start with the smallest acts: sharing a meal, offering a prayer, or choosing kindness in the middle of pain. And whenever visitors asked about it, he would smile softly and say, "That's a reminder that God never abandons the people who trust him," encouraging them to hold on to hope through even the darkest storms. And so Ethan's journey continued. Not as a man lost and broken, but as someone who had risen from the ashes of betrayal into a life filled with purpose, compassion, and faith, carrying forward the legacy of a woman whose brief encounter with him had changed everything, becoming a living testament that even shattered hearts can be rebuilt when grace steps in unexpectedly. As the seasons shifted and the years continued their steady march forward, Ethan's life flourished in ways he had never imagined back when he stood outside his old home, shattered by betrayal. And though the scar of that heartbreak still lived deep within him, it no longer controlled him. It simply reminded him of how far he had come from the night he knelt in the cold, begging God for an answer. Now, his days were filled with purpose, as he oversaw programs at the community center, helped struggling families find housing, mentored teenagers searching for direction, and visited shelters to offer meals and prayer, becoming a steady presence of hope for people who felt invisible, just as he once had. And through all this, the coin on his desk, small, rusty, and unremarkable to anyone else, shone like a quiet beacon, reminding him that every life, no matter how broken, carries the potential to spark miracles when touched by faith. One spring morning, as he prepared to speak at a local event about overcoming hardship, a soft knock sounded at his office door, and a middle-aged man stepped inside, shifting nervously before saying, "Mr. Walker, I need help." And though Ethan didn't recognize him at first, something about the man's eyes, tired, defeated, filled with shame, pulled at his memory until he finally realized this was the very man he had seen through the window years ago. The man Madison had kissed, the man whose presence had destroyed the last piece of Ethan's marriage, and the realization hit him so suddenly that he had to grip the edge of his desk to steady himself. The man introduced himself as Daniel Harris and explained in a trembling voice that his life had fallen apart shortly after that affair. His marriage failed, he battled addiction, lost his job, and now had nowhere left to turn. And when he heard about the community center, he swallowed his pride and came to ask for help. Unaware of the connection between them, Ethan felt a storm of emotions rise within him. Old pain, old wounds, memories he had buried under years of healing. But as Daniel spoke, he saw not the man who had taken part in his greatest heartbreak, but a human being desperate for redemption. A man standing exactly where Ethan once stood, broken and searching for a lifeline. And in that moment, Ethan felt God's gentle nudge pressing on his heart, reminding him that forgiveness was not about excusing the past, but freeing the soul from its chains. After a long breath, Ethan offered Daniel a seat and said calmly, "You're in the right place. Choosing compassion over anger and grace over bitterness, and over the next few months, Danielle attended counseling, joined support groups, volunteered at the center, and slowly began rebuilding his life just as Ethan once had, forming a quiet friendship with the very man whose pain he had unknowingly contributed to. A friendship rooted not in the past, but in mutual healing. One evening, after a long day of serving meals, Daniel broke down and apologized for the affair through tears, confessing that he had carried guilt for years, and Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder, saying, "We were both lost back then. God gave me a second chance, and now He's giving you one too." And the weight that lifted from Daniel's face in that moment was something Ethan never forgot. A living reminder of how forgiveness can heal wounds that time alone cannot reach. As life continued, Ethan expanded the center into a full non-profit organization, partnering with local churches, charities, and businesses to open temporary housing units for homeless families. And he worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would feel the loneliness he once experienced on the streets. No one should have to beg for food or cry into the cold night, praying for a sign, not when compassion could change everything with one small act. In his late 50s, Ethan was invited to speak at a national conference about resilience and faith. And as he stood before the audience, he shared his journey with humility, from the night his world crumbled to the miraculous encounter with a hungry woman, to the rusty coin that transformed despair into purpose, to the forgiveness that healed a wound he once believed was permanent. And by the time he finished, people stood to their feet in applause, not for him, but for the grace that had carried him from brokenness to strength. Years slipped by gently after that, each one marked with new stories of lives rebuilt, families restored, and hearts strengthened through the community he had devoted himself to. And though Ethan grew older, he remained tireless in his work, still showing up before sunrise to pray in the quiet halls of the center, and still believing that miracles were all around, waiting to bloom through kindness. When the day finally came that his health began to decline, he stepped back gradually, training younger leaders to take his place, all of them inspired not by his successes, but by the sincerity with which he lived every day, and on a peaceful Sunday morning surrounded by friends, volunteers, and community members who came to thank him for the impact he had made. Ethan held the rusty coin in his hand one last time, smiling weakly as he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for never leaving me," before closing his eyes in gratitude for a life shaped not by the pain that started his journey, but by the miracles that followed. In the weeks after his passing, the community center was renamed the Walker Hope Haven, and people traveled from across the city to hear his story. A story that continued inspiring countless hearts long after he was gone, proving that faith, kindness, and forgiveness can transform even the darkest chapters into legacies of light. And though Ethan never found the woman again in this life, many believed she had been an angel placed on his path, a belief that carried on through every person his story touched, reminding them that God never abandons those who trust Him. He simply waits for the moment their hearts are ready to see the miracle meant for them. At the end of this powerful journey, remember this: no matter how dark life becomes, no matter how deep the pain or how heavy the burden, faith has a way of guiding us toward the light. Every act of kindness carries the potential to spark a miracle, and every setback can become the beginning of something greater. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that God's timing is perfect, His plans are greater than our wounds, and He never abandons those who trust Him. Keep believing, keep hoping, and keep moving forward. Your miracle may already be on its way. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't need to miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment. Like and subscribe my channel. And visit my channel for more interesting story videos.